Some disappearances raise questions. Others raise something else. A chill you can't explain. In 2013, a 21-year-old Canadian student checked into this building and never walked out. The footage became a global obsession. Millions watched. Theories spiraled. And when they found her, the real mystery began. She was 21, bright-eyed, thoughtful, restless. She boarded a train with a notebook, a camera, and the need to disappear into somewhere new. Her name was Elisa Lam. Elisa grew up in Vancouver, British Columbia, the daughter of immigrants from Hong Kong. She studied at the University of British Columbia, though her path wasn't linear. She was intelligent, witty, introspective. But behind her words was a weight. She struggled with bipolar disorder and depression, conditions she wrote about candidly. Her Tumblr blog, Ether Fields, read like a diary folded into poetry. In January of 2013, Elisa left home for what she called her West Coast tour. She planned to visit several cities: San Diego, Los Angeles, maybe even San Francisco. She traveled by Amtrak and Greyhound, slow, quiet routes that gave her space to think. On January 28th, she arrived in downtown Los Angeles and checked into the Cecil Hotel. To most, the Cecil looked like just another cheap hotel in a tough part of town, but its walls told darker stories. Over the decades, it had become infamous for suicides, overdoses, and residents who never left. Among them, serial killers, drifters, and the mentally ill. Elisa probably didn't know. Or maybe she didn't believe in ghosts. At first, Elisa was placed in a shared room. But within 2 days, hotel management moved her into a private one. Her roommates had complained about her behavior. Agitated, erratic, talking to herself. No incident report was filed. No follow-up. Despite everything, she still called home every night. It was a promise she had made to her parents and herself. Until February 1st. That day, Elisa missed her scheduled checkout, and her voice disappeared. Her parents panicked and called the LAPD. Officers arrived at the Cecil that same night. Elisa's belongings were still in her room. Her wallet, clothes, medication, everything in its place except her. There was no sign of a struggle, no forced entry, no evidence of where she might have gone. Police began searching the building, floor by floor, room by room. Canine units were brought in. The dogs stopped at a window, then turned back. The trail went cold. For nearly 2 weeks, Elisa Lam was missing, and no one had a single clue. Until February 14th, when the LAPD released a 4-minute clip of security footage from an elevator. They said it was the last time Elisa was seen alive. What it captured would disturb the world. February 14th, 2013. 2 weeks had passed since Elisa Lam was last seen. Her family waited, the police stalled, the public barely noticed. And then, a video. Grainy, monochrome, and just over 4 minutes long. No sound, no context. Just surveillance footage from one of the Cecil Hotel's elevators. It was Elisa, and it would be the last confirmed sighting of her alive. She enters the elevator, calm at first. She leans forward, presses a row of buttons. Multiple floors, one after another. Then she steps back and waits. But the door doesn't close. Seconds pass. She seems uneasy. She edges to the doorway, leans out, looks left, then right. No one's there, but something feels off, as if she's hiding from someone, or waiting for something that never comes. She flattens against the wall, slipping into the corner, out of sight. Her posture is tense, crouched, listening. She steps out again. Gestures oddly with her hands, twisting, fluttering, as though communicating silently. Then she backs out of frame. The elevator remains open, still unmoving. For nearly a minute, Elisa never reappears, and then the door closes, briefly, then opens again. No one inside. To anyone watching, the footage was unsettling. Unexplainable. Why didn't the elevator move? Was she being followed? Was she hallucinating? Was someone just out of view? Within days, the video spread across the internet like wildfire. Uploaded to YouTube, Reddit, and countless forums, it sparked obsession. People analyzed her gestures, her body language, her clothing. They questioned everything. The frame rate, the shadows, the timing. They slowed it down, played it backwards, enlarged every second. Some believed she was under the influence of drugs. Others insisted she was suffering a manic episode, the erratic behavior, the hand gestures, the paranoid glances. But others weren't so sure. They saw something darker. They pointed to supernatural forces. Ghost stories tied to the Cecil Hotel. Some even speculated the video had been tampered with. Slowed down, parts cut out, and they weren't entirely wrong. Experts later confirmed the timestamp jumps. At least 53 seconds of footage were missing. Why? Who removed them? And what happened during that time? What was meant to be a public plea for help became a global spectacle. The video made headlines worldwide. News anchors speculated. Paranormal investigators weighed in. Web sleuths crafted elaborate timelines and theories, mapping out the elevator layout, the button configuration, the delay mechanisms. Everyone wanted to explain what had happened in that elevator, but no one could. Through all the noise, the one question remained unanswered. Where was Elisa Lam? Her family still waited. The LAPD searched, but behind the screens and speculation, something had already changed inside the hotel. The water had started to taste strange. Guests complained of low pressure, a foul smell, a dark color to the water that filled their cups and flowed from their showers. They didn't know it yet, but Elisa hadn't left the building. As February deepened, the mystery surrounding Elisa Lam grew heavier with each passing day. But inside the Cecil Hotel, it wasn't the missing posters or unanswered questions that disturbed the guests. It was the water. Complaints began trickling in by mid-February. The water pressure had dropped. The color was wrong, dark, rusty, even black. The taste was metallic. Some described it as syrupy, others oily. It didn't feel clean, it didn't feel safe. Guests noticed it while brushing their teeth, while showering, while filling glasses to drink. But no one could have imagined what they were consuming or where it came from. February 19th, 20 days since Elisa vanished. A maintenance worker named Santiago Lopez was tasked with investigating the hotel's rooftop water tanks. The job was simple: check for pressure issues. But what he found was far from routine. The tanks were large, 10 feet tall, 4 feet wide, sealed from the top with heavy latched lids. Santiago climbed a ladder, opened one, and peered inside. Floating in the dark water was a body. It was Elisa Lam. She was found nude, face up, decomposed from weeks in the water. Her clothing, the red hoodie and black shorts seen in the elevator footage, was recovered from the bottom of the tank, separate from her body. There were no visible signs of trauma, no evidence of foul play, no struggle, no wounds, and yet, no explanation. To access that tank, Elisa would have needed to climb several locked doors, stairwells, and finally a ladder. The rooftop was protected by an alarm, one that hotel staff claimed would sound if anyone tried to enter without a key. But there was no alarm, no triggered sensors, no surveillance showing her passage. It was as though she had simply appeared there. The implications were horrifying not just for Elisa's family, but for every guest staying at the hotel. They had been using that water, bathing in it, drinking it, cooking with it. They were unknowingly sharing their most basic routines with the decomposing remains of a missing woman. Some guests fell ill. Others left in panic. Health officials were called. The tanks were drained. A biohazard team sanitized the system. But by then, the damage was psychological. Word spread quickly. The Cecil was in the headlines again, but not for suicides or serial killers. This time, it was the water, and what had been inside it. And still, one critical question loomed. How did Elisa get inside the tank? It wasn't just a mystery, it was a physical impossibility. Or at least, it should have been. She was 21 years old, small-framed, but not particularly athletic. The hatch to the tank was heavy, hard to lift even for hotel workers. And once inside, the smooth walls of the container offered no ladder, no foothold, no grip. If she had gone in voluntarily, she could never have gotten out. With no injuries, no witnesses, and no clear motive, the LAPD hit a wall. The only thing they had left to explain her death was science. The autopsy was coming, and it would raise more questions than it answered. By the time Elisa Lam's body was recovered from the water tank, she had been submerged for over 2 weeks. The decomposition was advanced, yet the questions surrounding her death were still fresh. And now, all eyes turned to the coroner. The autopsy would be the definitive word, the science that could clear the fog of speculation, online theories, and supernatural whispers. Instead, it deepened the mystery. The autopsy was conducted on February 21st. The official report was not released until June 20th, 4 months later, and when it arrived, the ruling was simple, almost sterile: accidental drowning. But inside that report were details that felt anything but simple. Elisa was found nude. Her clothing, including her iconic red hoodie and black shorts, were recovered separately at the bottom of the tank. Strangely, they were covered in a sand-like particulate. There were no visible injuries, no cuts, no bruises, no broken bones, no indication of sexual assault. Her lungs contained water, indicating she had drowned, but there was no clear sign of how she had ended up inside the tank. One of the most perplexing aspects came from the toxicology screen. Elisa had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and she was known to be on several prescribed medications: Wellbutrin, lamotrigine, Seroquel, and Effexor. The report showed that some, but not all, of these medications were present in her system. The levels suggested she may not have been taking them regularly, but how much that contributed to her death was never conclusively stated. Internet sleuths and experts alike pored over the pharmacology. Some argued that the missing levels of antipsychotics could have triggered a manic or psychotic episode. Others pointed out that her behavior on the elevator might be consistent with acute panic, hallucination, or disassociation. But others weren't convinced. The autopsy didn't explain the security breach, the rooftop alarm that was never triggered, the missing 53 seconds of elevator footage, the way her body was found, unclothed, alone, in a tank nearly impossible to access. And there were oddities, things the report could not answer. Why was the lid reportedly closed when her body was discovered, despite police photos showing it open? Why didn't the dogs, brought in during the early days of the investigation, pick up her scent on the roof? Why did hotel staff initially claim the alarm system was functional, only to later contradict themselves? There were too many gaps, too many contradictions. The official word was accidental drowning. But to many, that ruling felt like the beginning, not the end, of the story. Even the coroner's summary acknowledged uncertainty. Her manner of death was listed as accident, but the how and why were left to speculation, and the case was closed. But the public never stopped searching for answers. What the autopsy failed to settle, the internet would attempt to unravel. And in doing so, it would shine a spotlight not just on Elisa, but on the dark legacy of the place she vanished inside. The rooftop of the Cecil Hotel wasn't just hard to access, it was designed to be off-limits. Guests weren't supposed to be there. Employees barely went up, and yet, that's where Elisa Lam's body was found. So how did she get there? What began as a tragic mystery was rapidly turning into a logistical puzzle, one that didn't make sense no matter how you turned it. To reach the roof by normal means, Elisa would have needed to exit her room, find a stairwell, and then pass through at least one heavy locked door. That final door was secured by a keycard system accessible only to hotel staff. It was also connected to an alarm, one the hotel manager insisted was loud enough to be heard from several floors below. If it had been triggered, someone should have noticed. No such alarm was reported. This raised immediate concerns about whether the system had been turned off, malfunctioned, or, as some speculated, disabled. Investigators questioned employees, maintenance staff, night shift managers. No one could confirm hearing anything unusual during the days Elisa was last seen. The alarm had failed. Or it was never set in the first place. And there was a second possible route, the fire escape. It ran along the south wall of the hotel, old, rusted, narrow, barely wide enough for one person at a time. Theoretically, someone could have climbed from a hotel window, stepped out onto the metal platform, and scaled it all the way to the rooftop. But there were no fingerprints, no security footage. No one saw her climbing it. Even more puzzling, police dogs had swept the area, trained to follow scent. But they never once led investigators to the fire escape or the rooftop. If Elisa had gone out the window and up the fire escape, it would have required significant agility. The climb wasn't easy, especially not alone, especially not at night, especially if she was, as the autopsy suggested, under-medicated and suffering a manic episode. There were no injuries on her hands, no scrapes or bruises, no torn clothing. The theory that she climbed it voluntarily began to fray. Then came the most baffling physical element of all, the water tank. Each tank was cylindrical, 10 feet tall, 4 feet across. There were no built-in ladders, no footholds. Getting to the top required an external ladder attached to the side of the building. Even then, the heavy steel lid needed to be lifted, not an easy task for a person of Elisa's size and strength. Yet, somehow, she got inside. The hotel's maintenance worker, Santiago Lopez, stated that the lid to the tank was closed when he discovered Elisa. But police photos from the day of the body's recovery show the lid wide open. That inconsistency sparked debate. If the lid was closed, then who sealed it after she entered the tank? It was not self-closing, it was heavy, it needed force. If it was open, why didn't anyone notice it earlier? Every angle of Elisa's final moments posed a contradiction. No alarms, no camera footage, no witnesses, no explanation for how she reached the roof. No clear reason she would have gone there in the first place. But somehow, all those impossibilities happened at once. Officially, the police ruled her death accidental. The hotel would return to operation. The case would close. But the locked doors, the silent alarms, the missing minutes of elevator footage, none of that ever sat right. Not with the public, not with the internet, and certainly not with the family Elisa left behind. In the void of hard answers, the internet would step in, armed with theories, timelines, and frame-by-frame analysis. And in doing so, it would turn this case into something else entirely. Before the police had even closed their case, another investigation had already taken root, online. The elevator footage had become viral. Uploaded, shared, dissected. 4 minutes of grainy surveillance turned a missing person case into a digital obsession. And suddenly, the story of Elisa Lam was no longer just about what happened. It became about who could solve it. Internet sleuths around the world picked apart every frame of the elevator video. They mapped the elevator layout, timed the door intervals, counted the buttons she pressed, compared her behavior to known symptoms of psychosis and to patterns in paranormal folklore. They built timelines, made flowcharts, posted theories, and conspiracies. Some believed Elisa was playing the elevator game, a rumored supernatural ritual that originated in online forums. Others suggested she had been targeted by a government experiment, or that her behavior was the result of an unknown drug, untraceable in standard toxicology reports. And then came the accusations. One online community became convinced they had found a killer, a musician named Morbid, who had posted horror-themed videos online. He had stayed at the Cecil Hotel. He sang about death. He wore black. That was all it took. The internet descended on him. He was doxxed, harassed, and accused of murder, all without a shred of real evidence. But the mob wasn't interested in evidence. They were interested in closure. Morbid wasn't even in Los Angeles when Elisa disappeared. Police cleared him, but the damage was done. His mental health collapsed. His career dissolved. In their search for truth, the internet had created its own villain and nearly destroyed an innocent man. Meanwhile, Elisa's real story was being buried beneath myths. The video, slowed and filtered and color-corrected, was now fuel for horror channels and conspiracy sites. Her name was less human, more headline. In their hunger to understand, people were no longer asking what happened. They were trying to make what happened fit the story they had already chosen to believe. But Elisa Lam was not fiction. She was not a puzzle box or an ARG or a ghost story. She was a 21-year-old woman who had been struggling. She had dreams, a family, a voice. In trying to understand her death, the internet had, perhaps unintentionally, dehumanized her life. Years later, Netflix would release a documentary. Dozens of YouTubers would build careers around breakdowns of the case. And yet, very few focused on Elisa herself, on what her experience must have felt like, on what it meant to live with her illness, to travel alone, to vanish into a space that refused to hold answers. The internet detectives had built a palace of theories, but at the center of it all was a truth they couldn't explain. No edits, no ghosts, just a missing girl and a tank of water. Long before Elisa Lam checked into the Cecil Hotel, the building had a history that made some believe tragedy was inevitable. From the outside, the Cecil was just another aging relic of Los Angeles. 12 stories of concrete and windows overlooking Skid Row. But behind its doors was a different story. One written in blood, silence, and a chilling repetition of death. Built in 1924, the Cecil was intended to be a grand destination for wealthy travelers. But just a few years later, the Great Depression hit, and with it came economic collapse, desperation, and darkness. By the 1940s, the hotel had become a haven for transients, addicts, and the mentally ill. It bordered Skid Row, a neighborhood plagued by poverty, crime, and neglect. Death soon became a regular guest. The Cecil was nicknamed the Suicide Hotel. Between the 1930s and 1960s, at least a dozen suicides occurred inside its walls. Jumpers, poisonings, slit wrists in bathtubs. One woman reportedly jumped from her room and landed on a pedestrian below, killing him instantly. The building had no pattern, only tragedy. But it wasn't just suicides. In the mid-1980s, serial killer Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, was living on the 14th floor during his brutal murder spree Residents later claimed they saw him come and go, blood on his clothes, unconcerned. In 1991, Austrian serial killer Jack Unterweger stayed at the Cecil, allegedly using his time there to stalk and murder sex workers. For some reason, killers were drawn to the place, and the place did nothing to resist. Room 507, Room 636, the elevator shaft, the stairwells, all were settings for deaths no one talked about. Murders unsolved, overdoses undocumented, people who arrived alone and never left. The hotel changed names over the years. The stay on Main was a rebranding effort, but it couldn't shake what lived beneath the new paint and cheap signage. It had become more than just a building. It was a monument to grief, a magnet for chaos. By the time Elisa Lam arrived in 2013, the hotel had already swallowed decades of despair. She was placed on the 5th floor, the same floor where Ramirez once slept, where others had jumped, where voices had once echoed late into the night and never explained why. Did Elisa know the history? Had she read the stories? Or was it all just coincidence? An innocent choice of lodging with a cursed reputation? The Cecil Hotel didn't kill Elisa Lam. Not directly, but its walls have a way of holding on to people. Some believe it's cursed. Others say it's just coincidence stacked on top of misfortune. Either way, history doesn't forget. And for Elisa Lam, she became the next chapter in the story that refuses to end. Elisa Lam was not a mystery to those who knew her. She was intelligent, witty, deeply thoughtful. But she also struggled. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression years earlier. And like many who suffer quietly, her struggle lived mostly beneath the surface. Elisa was open about her mental health on her blog, describing her panic attacks, her fear of falling behind, her exhaustion from trying to seem okay to the world around her. She took 4 medications: Wellbutrin, lamotrigine, quetiapine, and venlafaxine. A cocktail carefully designed to regulate mood, manage depressive episodes, and stabilize her behavior. But when her body was found, something was missing. The toxicology report showed only trace amounts of her prescribed medications, far below therapeutic levels. Some were completely absent. It raised the first hard question. Had Elisa stopped taking her meds? And if so, why? Bipolar disorder without medication can be unpredictable, shifting rapidly between mania and depression. In manic states, patients may behave impulsively. They may speak rapidly, experience grandiose thinking, hallucinations, or paranoia. They may believe they're being watched, that something is after them. The elevator video suddenly seemed to mirror all of that. But there's something important to remember. Mental illness does not explain everything. It can influence behavior, but it doesn't erase logic or override physical limitations. Elisa was a small woman, climbing onto a water tank, lifting a steel lid, and falling inside without assistance, even in a manic state. Still raised questions no diagnosis could fully answer. So then came the second question: where was the safety net? Elisa's family had known about her diagnosis for years. They helped manage her treatment, but she traveled alone, thousands of miles from home, in a city where she knew no one, staying in a building infamous for crime, addiction, and decay. No one checked in with her daily. No therapist monitored her closely. The hotel staff didn't notice her erratic behavior until she vanished. In a society where mental illness is often medicalized, Elisa still slipped through every crack. In the end, her death was ruled an accident, influenced by bipolar disorder. That's what the report said. But that conclusion did little to comfort those who believed there should have been more support, more follow-up, more compassion, more protection for someone fighting a war inside her mind. Mental illness doesn't always look the way we expect. It doesn't come with a warning siren or a neat conclusion. Sometimes it's just a quiet unraveling, unnoticed by the world until it's too late to stop. And in Elisa Lam's case, the unraveling left more than grief. It left silence. It left questions. And it left behind a haunting reminder of how invisible some struggles truly are. January 26, 2013. Elisa Lam checks into the Cecil Hotel. She's traveling alone, documenting her trip through photos and Tumblr posts. She smiles. She visits the bookstore. She writes that she's tired, but hopeful. By January 31st, she disappears. Her last known appearance, the elevator surveillance video, shot just after midnight. What happens next is unknown. There is no security footage of her leaving the building. No footage of her climbing to the roof. No witnesses come forward, no sound, no struggle, no screams. For 19 days, her body remains undiscovered, until guests begin to complain about the water. Low pressure, odd taste, a smell they can't describe. When hotel maintenance checks the rooftop tanks, they find her. Autopsy results cite no signs of trauma, no drugs or alcohol. No suicide note. The conclusion is accidental drowning, influenced by Elisa's bipolar disorder. But the case left behind too many unanswered questions. How did she access the locked rooftop? Why didn't the alarm sound? How did she get into the tank and then close the lid if it truly was closed, as the first witness claimed? Why were the therapeutic levels of her medications missing? Was it intentional or an oversight? Why was a minute of footage missing from the elevator video, and who, if anyone, tampered with it? Even among experts, there is no consensus. Some believe she suffered a psychotic episode. Others believe there was foul play, someone who knew the building well, someone who knew how to avoid the cameras, the hotel staff, a guest, a stranger who slipped in through one of the fire doors. No one has ever been charged, no suspects named. Elisa's parents never accepted the conclusion. In 2015, they filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the hotel, but the court dismissed it, ruling that Elisa's behavior was unpredictable, and the hotel could not have foreseen what would happen. Legally, the case is over, but narratively, emotionally, it never really ended, because this isn't just a ghost story. It's not an urban legend. It's not a viral video meant for clicks. It's the real story of a young woman, brilliant, complicated, deeply human, whose life intersected with a place that seemed built to consume stories like hers. A building full of locked doors and silent alarms. A system that watched but didn't protect. And a world that tried to make sense of it all and failed. Her name was Elisa Lam, and even now, we don't know what really happened, but we remember her, not as a headline, not as a horror, but as someone whose silence still speaks, louder than ever.